Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to show you just how easy it is to replace a toilet. Let's get started. We're going to start by locating the supply line for the toilet. On this one it goes down to the floor where the cutoff valve is. Yours may be going into the wall. And we're going to use that shutoff valve to turn off the water supply to the toilet. This one just requires a 90-degree turn, though yours may require several turns. Next we're going to flush the toilet, and we're going to hold the handle down the entire time we're flushing until this tank gets completely empty. Now by holding down the handle like that, we get rid of most of the water, but not quite all of it. There's a little bit left in that tank. So I'm going to use a bucket like this and a sponge like this to soak up what's left. As you can see, there is still just a little bit of water down in there. So we'll put the sponge down in there, soak up as much of the water as we can, and then we'll squeeze it out into this bucket. Now this step is really pretty optional, but it does help cut down on spills when you do take the toilet out and carry it out of the house. And just like with the tank, there's going to be some extra water down here in the bowl. We'll just pull that out into a bucket. Alright, that'll reduce how much water we spill when we carry the toilet out. So next we need to completely disconnect this supply line. Depending on the type of fitting you have, you might need 2 wrenches to do this. You might be able to do it with just a pair of pliers. In the case of the style that I've got here, it's easiest to use 1 wrench to hold the valve, and the other to break the connection free. And when you're doing this, there's going to be a little bit of water that comes out just from what's in the supply line. So I like to just have a rag handy to catch whatever's going to come out of there. Ooh, there we go. Just a few drops, not too bad. Now we're almost ready to remove the toilet from its mounting, but before I do, I just wanted to mention, if you're working by yourself, you may find it easier to remove this tank and perhaps even the seat, as that will reduce the weight that you've got to carry out when you do remove the base. I am going to do that today since I am working alone. I want to demonstrate how to do it, but if you've got someone there to help, you can probably skip this next part. So under the toilet, you'll have some little fasteners like these. They're usually plastic fasteners threaded onto a metal post. You might have 2, you might have 3. This toilet has 3 of them. I find that they're easiest to get them started with a pair of pliers like this, and then you can usually finish them off by hand. Alright, with the water supply completely disconnected and this bowl now loose, we can just simply lift the bowl off the toilet and put it somewhere safe. So on both sides of the toilet, you'll have a little cap like this. You can just pop that off to expose the nut that is holding the toilet down. Use a wrench to get that nut loose. These shouldn't be all that tight in the first place. Get it started a little bit and then you should be able to take it off with your fingers pretty easily. There'll be a little washer like this on there to pull that off as well. And then there's going to be a little plastic cap like this. Now this is where things start to get really messy, because this is going to start to pull off some wax if they used a wax ring when installing this toilet. So I like to make sure I've got a little rag nearby to stick these kind of sticky parts into. Just like on the first side, we'll pull that nut off, pull both those washers off, and now we're ready to lift the toilet. Alright, it's finally time to remove this toilet, but before I do, I wanted to show a quick tip. It's something that I learned years ago when I replaced a toilet and I made a gigantic mess all over the floor, and that is, get yourself a nice big piece of cardboard like this. Now this big piece of cardboard I pulled out of the packaging for the new toilet, though you could just as easily cut a section of the box for the new toilet out as well, or just find another piece of cardboard somewhere. The reason you want something like this is there is going to be some pretty disgusting stuff on the bottom side of this toilet, and as soon as I lift it up I'm going to want to put it down somewhere, and your instinct is just to put it down on the floor near where you pulled it out. The problem is there is going to be some pretty disgusting stuff on the bottom side of this toilet. Of course there's going to be the wax ring there, but there might be other unpleasantness as well. So what I do is I put the piece of cardboard right in front of the toilet. Then I'm going to pull the toilet off of its mount and set it right on the piece of cardboard. This keeps my floors nice and clean. Alright, let's get on with it. Now this toilet was caulked down, so in order to free it of the caulk, you want to rock it one way and then the other to make sure it's completely free. And once you're sure it's completely free, then you can just grip it from the sides of the bowl, lift it straight up, and put it on your cardboard. The other pretty convenient thing about a piece of cardboard like this is it makes it easy to just slide the toilet out of the way. And if it's a particularly heavy unit, this makes it easier to move. With the toilet removed, you'll probably find a wax ring like this that has sealed the toilet to the drain. This entire thing has to be completely cleaned up and removed. Now the best way I've found to clean these wax rings is to use a putty knife. Just get all of it completely pulled off of there. You'll definitely want gloves for this. This stuff is sticky and gross. The putty knife works pretty well for getting most of this wax off the top surface, but you may need a flathead screwdriver like this to get it out of some of the nooks and crannies. Then I like to just kind of wipe down the surface of this a little bit. Try and remove as much of the extra leftover surface wax as I can. Once I've got that wax more or less cleaned up, I like to just take the rags I'm using and kind of stuff them down into that sewer opening. And this helps seal off the sewer just a little bit to kind of cut down on the amount of sewage gases that come up into the house between when I take off the old toilet and put on the new. Now, one very important thing to remember here, take this back out before you put on the new toilet. I've heard horror stories of people forgetting and leaving these in there, and your toilet won't flush. So triple check when you get ready to put in your new toilet to make sure you've removed these rags before you place it. Also, don't forget to clean the old caulk off the floor from the previous toilet. I'm just scraping it up here with a screwdriver. Now, anytime you replace a toilet, you need to replace these mounting posts. Now, these were mounted in here with some nuts to hold them down. Typically, they're going to be fixed in place with just a little plastic washer. So if yours have nuts, just loosen the nut up, and then you should be able to slide and remove the entire assembly all in one piece. Just throw this whole thing away. That leaves us a little bit more of that previous wax. We'll just kind of clean that out. Alright, with those mounting posts removed and the wax all cleaned up from off this mounting plate, we're ready to start the installation process for the new toilet. The first thing you need to do is consider how are you going to seal this back up. So this is the basic wax ring that came with the toilet that I'm going to be installing today, and I'm not going to use this. I'm going to tell you why. This wax ring is really basic. It is just literally a ring of wax. And while this will probably form a perfectly good seal on the toilet, if you have to ever plunge the toilet with a lot of force to clear a blockage, then there's a good chance you will burst the seal that this ring will produce. And I don't know about you, but the idea of having to clean up after that is not really something I'm excited about dealing with. So you may be wondering, instead of using a wax ring, what other options are there? Well, there's several different options. The first is also basically just a wax ring, but it's got a couple of important differences. First, it's been reinforced to help kind of prevent those sorts of blowouts that I've talked about when plunging. And it's got an alignment sleeve that makes sure that you get everything lined up properly when you're installing the toilet. And while this is a little bit of an upgrade from a basic wax ring, there are other better options to consider. The next one is called the Perfect Seal Wax Ring from Danco, and this is still at its heart just a wax ring, but it features a really beefed up housing. And this housing is supposed to protect against blowouts and leaks as a result of strong plunging or clearing blockages. But at its heart, this is still a wax ring, and it's still going to leave a mess on the bottom of the toilet and possibly on the flange in your floor, just like I had to clean off earlier. Still, if you're convinced you must have a wax ring of some kind, but you're concerned about blowouts, this is a good option. And the final thing to consider is this Fluid Master Better Than Wax. It's a universal adapter that does not have any wax in it at all, and this is what I'm going to be installing today, principally because I don't like the mess that the wax makes. So this is basically a big silicone gasket that is specially shaped so that it will seal perfectly with the bottom of your toilet and with the flange. And it's got this compressible foam in there that will make sure that you get a nice, good, tight seal. Now the flange I'm installing on today is a little higher than the floor surface, so I'm not going to need this spacer, but if your flange is down recessed under your floor surface, this comes with this spacer. And if it's recessed a lot, you can just stack these one on top of the other to make sure that you get the right distance and the right spacing. So I'm going to be installing this Better Than Wax seal today, but of course you can use whatever you prefer, and the installation steps really are pretty similar for all of them. It starts with putting in new posts. Now, no matter what you choose for your seal, it should have come with a bolt that looks like this and a little plastic washer. This bolt has an oblong head for a very specific reason I'll show you in a moment. It also has a little notch in it right up here, right near the top of my finger there, which we'll also get to in just a little bit. Now typically to install these things, you'll take that plastic washer and just slide it down most of the length of the bolt to about there. And then you can slide this whole thing into the section of the flange where it goes, and the little plastic washer helps to hold that in the right position. But I'm not going to do it quite like that today, and I'll show you why. So you want these bolts to be held perfectly vertically up and down, and these little plastic washers will sort of do that, but there's still a lot of play side to side with these bolts, and they can also still slide pretty easily up and down in those slots. Now if you're holding a 50-pound toilet and you're trying to get it to line up with these bolts, that can be a little tricky if they're not perfectly vertical up and down. Now the sealing kit that I'm using comes with these 2 nuts, but these are designed to be used on top of the toilet itself. So I'm going to save these to be used on top of the toilet as intended. But remember the really cheap wax ring that came with the toilet? It also included some mounting hardware. So I'm going to use the nuts that are in this little package here, and we're going to use that to hold down these posts a little bit more securely. So if you're planning to use a little nut like this, just like I am, then I like to just put them right on top of the bolt, even with the little plastic washer down there. That little washer will help make sure that the nut seats properly and stays a little bit more secure. And as you can see, even just finger tight on this nut, this post is now much more secure. It doesn't slide back and forth in its slot. It's not going to flop around at all when you put the toilet down over the top of it, unlike these that are really not very secure at all by themselves. Now here's a quick tip for lining up these bolts. You want to make sure that the line that goes from this bolt to this bolt is exactly parallel to the back wall behind the toilet. For instance, you don't want one of these bolts over here like this, because then the line isn't going to be parallel, and your toilet will wind up being installed crooked. So make sure that they line up properly. If you're using nuts, once you've got these things aligned, go ahead and just give these nuts a little bit of tension. You don't want to make them super tight, just enough to make sure they're not going to go anywhere. And now I'm ready to install my waxless seal. Remember when I talked about how important it was to take these rags back out? This is the other reason I like these particular seals instead of a wax ring. They force you to remember to do that, otherwise this seal will not go where it needs to go. So again, double check, make sure you have removed your rags from the sewer opening. If you're using a seal like this, just place it over the posts that are now in place and we're ready to bring our toilet in. If instead of using a seal like this, you're going to use a traditional wax ring, it's better to attach that to the bottom of the toilet like this. That makes sure it gets lined up with the flange on the toilet properly, and you can just press it in place with some light pressure with your fingers. Don't use both this and one of these though, it's an either or situation. So I'm ready to bring the new toilet in, just like when I pulled the old one out. I've got a piece of cardboard or packing material that I'm going to bring the toilet in and set it on. And that's really just to protect the floors from scratches. The bottoms of these toilets aren't the smoothest things in the world. Now again, since I'm working alone, it's easiest to bring in the toilet without the tank on the back yet. We're going to add that after I've set the toilet in place. So to set the toilet, you're just going to pick it straight up and put it in place right so that those posts line up with the holes on either side of the toilet. If you're using a wax ring, apply even pressure to both sides of the toilet to seat it completely. Now that the toilet has been placed, it's time to secure it to the floor. Your toilet probably came with a plastic washer that looks something like this. One side should be marked as this side up. Make sure that faces up and put it over the post. On top of that goes a metal washer, and finally the nut that secures everything down. Do this on both sides, securing them just finger tight. So now it's time to snug down the mounting bolts. I like to start on one side and give it a few turns and then go to the other side and then back to the first and go back and forth 3 or 4 times. You don't need to make these super tight. You can crack that porcelain. Once it's snugged down though, the toilet should be very secure. It shouldn't rock side to side or forward and backward. It should be a nice stable platform. So now that the toilet has been secured to the floor and has been tightened down here so there's no more wobble in it, it's time to put these little caps on. The problem is these caps will not go over these posts because the posts are too tall. Remember when I mentioned earlier that there's a little notch in these posts? Well, that's where you're supposed to cut them with a hacksaw if you need to cut them a little shorter. With those posts cut shorter, now you can just snap these little caps in place. If it's a little tight and hard to push down, you may need to just give it a few little taps with a small rubber mallet. Alright, now that we've got the bowl installed and secured down, I'm going to turn my attention to the tank. Now, as a reminder, I'm doing these separately because I'm working alone. If you have someone there to help you during your installation, usually it's a better idea to attach the tank to the bowl before you install the toilet in the first place. But I'm working alone, so this is how I'm going to do it. Now your toilet probably came with a hardware kit like this. This is a rubber gasket and a couple of bolts, nuts, and washers. Those are going to be used to secure the tank to the bowl. It also came with a little supply line, but this one's only 12 inches long and is not going to quite reach for our installation. So I went to my local big box store and I picked up a longer one. This will give us plenty of length and a little bit extra. So to get our tank set up, we're going to install our supply line. There should be a fitting somewhere on the bottom of the tank that the supply line just screws into. Now you want to put this in pretty tight, but don't over tighten it. There's a rubber gasket inside there that will crush and makes a nice watertight seal. It needs to be about as tight as you can get it with your fingers. So next is installing the gasket down here and the mounting bolts. Now this might be a little bit different for your toilet, so consult your instructions, but for this one, the gasket just stretches over that bottom mounting flange, and it's got just enough friction that it's not going to fall off when I pick up the toilet. Then you've got these mounting bolts that just slide into these little mounting brackets, and those are retained so that when we pick up the tank again, they're not going to fall out. Next, we'll install this washer and this nut. Now, just like when we installed the bowl to the floor, we only want to put these finger tight to start, and then we're going to tighten them down a little bit at a time on each side so the tank gets pulled down evenly. And now we can connect our supply line to the supply of the floor or the wall. As with just about all of the fittings you're going to put on for a toilet, don't make this too tight. The rubber gasket inside will make a good seal, and if you make it too tight, it can leak. Now we're going to install the seat, and I'm not going to go over tons of detail about exactly how to do this because it varies a fair bit between manufacturers, but there's usually a bolt that goes through the top side and gets captured by a plastic nut that comes in from the underside. Read and follow the directions that come with your toilet for this. Alright, we're just about ready to finally turn the water supply back on and let the tank fill. Before I do that, I'm going to put down a couple of paper towels. This will help let me know if there's any leaks because they're easier to find in paper towels like that. Okay, with a few paper towels down, we can turn the water supply back on and then check for leaks. I let it fill for just a few seconds and then I come back and feel here. There's no leaks on this fitting, and there's no leaks on the fitting at the bottom of the tank either. Okay, with no leaks detected, either at the supply line or at the bottom of the tank or where the tank meets the bowl, I'm going to go ahead and turn the water supply back on, and we'll let the tank fill all the way up. So now it's time to check our water level to make sure it's filling to the right height. Most tanks are going to have a water line marked somewhere on the back of the tank, but in this particular toilet, the water line is on the side of this right here. It's really faint and hard to read, but it's a little bit low, so I'm going to adjust it just a little bit. Now the mechanism you use for adjusting the height of the toilet water level is a little bit different for each toilet, but this one, it's just this screw right here. We'll give it a couple of turns and flush it again to see if the water's where we want it now. So after some quick adjustment, you can see this fills perfectly right up to the water line. And after carefully checking one more time for leaks and finding none, we can put the lid on this toilet and our install is complete. Well, I say it's complete, but there's one more thing to consider, and that's whether or not we're going to caulk the toilet to the floor. Now, there's lots of arguments from people about why they do or why they don't, and I want to hear from you. Do you caulk your toilet to the floor? Let me know down in the comments, but let me go through some of the arguments both against and for doing so. So why wouldn't you want to caulk your toilet to the floor? Well, I've heard three main reasons that people decide not to do it. The first is it can make it a little bit more difficult to detect if a leak has ever happened with the seal between the toilet and the sewer. And the longer a leak like that goes undetected, the more damage it can do to your subfloor. The second reason I've heard is that it makes it a little bit more difficult to do any repairs to the toilet. It's just one more barrier you've got to get through before you can remove the toilet. And the final reason is that people say, well, you know, you've already got that seal under the toilet. You don't need to put another seal on the outside. It just is extra work. There's no real reason to do it. Now, there are some good reasons you may want to consider caulking your toilet to the floor. The first is just the aesthetics of it. Perhaps you really like a nice clean bead of caulk, the way it looks joining the porcelain to your flooring material. Or perhaps your floor is not very even and the toilet is kind of having a tendency to want to try and rock a little bit. And adding some caulk there will help even that out, provide a little bit more stable platform and not endanger that seal that you put under the toilet. Or perhaps you've got little kids in the house and you're worried about the sink in the bathroom overflowing, or maybe somebody's aim isn't the greatest and you're concerned about water or moisture getting underneath that toilet lip and potentially causing some problems with your subfloor. All of those are great reasons, but the biggest reason, if you ask me, is that International Plumbing Code actually requires it. Now, a lot of people say that the seal that you put under the bottom of the toilet that seals it to the sewage drain is good enough, but I kind of disagree. I think that the plumbing code is pretty clear that you definitely should actually caulk or seal, is the word that the code uses, seal the fixture to either the floor or the wall anywhere that the fixture touches it. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. When you install toilets, do you bother caulking them? Do you do it on kind of a case-by-case basis? It's up to you. I mean, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm not your mother after all. But I am going to caulk this toilet to the floor, so come along with me and I'll show you how I do that. Now let's talk for just a minute about the type of caulk and how you're going to want to apply it. First off, if you've got a caulk gun like this and a big long tube like this, you'll find that working down in these tight areas back and behind your toilet is going to be pretty close to impossible, so I don't recommend you use something this large. Now you should be able to find a small tube of caulk like this. This is not a very big job, so you don't need a lot of caulk in the first place, and a little tube like this is a lot easier to get down and around the sides and back of the toilet. Now, no matter what caulk you choose, make sure it's a silicone-based one and that it's rated for kitchen and bath projects. Now the first step in caulking is to trim the very tip of the caulk nozzle, just a little bit. You don't need a great big huge opening. First, gently squeeze out a very sparing bead of caulk in the crack. You don't need very much. Then get a nice wet sponge and go over the area back and forth 3 or 4 times. This will help spread out the caulk and seal it into that gap. It'll also clean off any excess that doesn't belong. Now if you find any areas that didn't quite get enough, you can always come back and add a little bit more. And that's really all there is to it. Make sure you do the entire perimeter of the toilet. Now once that caulk has had a chance to dry, then this toilet is ready for use. Hey, if you've enjoyed this video or maybe even learned a little something, you can let me know about that by hitting the thumbs up button down below. And if you would like to tell me about something I did completely wrong, then there's the comment box down there for that. I look forward to hearing from you. And if you want to see more content like this, of course, you can think about subscribing, but there's no pressure there. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Or about whether or not toilet... Flushing sounds. This washer that... Camera's falling. Goodbye, camera. That smells pleasant. Came out of the packaging that is... I'll get this right. One of these days. One of these days I'll get this right. There we go. That's better. We'll start by flushing the toilet, and when we do this, hold down the handle the entire... No, first we gotta start by turning off the water. Just kidding.